So we use these generators to pump water at the wells all the time, and the other day we'd run this one out of gas, and then when we filled it up, the gas was leaking, dripping just a little bit out the carburetor. So sometimes what happens is you'll get a little bit of dirt or something in the fuel tank make its way down to the carburetor, and it'll hold the needle valve open just a little bit, get jammed in there, and it doesn't take very much. Just gas is so thin that if it's not completely seated in the needle valve, it'll leak out. So I don't think there's any kind of fuel filter on these generators. We've got just a filter, screen, gas going in the tank, and then there is a sediment bowl that kind of sits on the bottom of the gas cock there that you can turn the gas on and off. This just unscrews, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So first step we did was we shut off the gas going down to the carburetor at the drain cock there, and then we loosened this off and looked inside, and I dug a little bit of stuff out here. You can see there's just a little bit of dirt in there. That doesn't take much. A little bit of that getting in the wrong spot can cause a problem, but anyways, we'll just clean. I've seen these a lot worse. I'll just clean this up a little bit and stick it back on, and then we'll see if we can get the bottom off the carb and check the needle valve. So we got it more or less cleaned out there. So it's plastic. So I'm going to put it on finger tight, and then just a little bit with the wrench, not much because we don't want to break nothing. It's as tight as I can get it with my fingers, and then just a tad more with the wrench and call that good. If it leaks, we'll reevaluate how tight it is. So I'll take the air filter off, just loosen off the wing nut, and this should lift up, off. Here's the air filter. There's just a little bit of a baffle in there that keeps everything in place. And I'm just looking for a couple of bolts to pull that thing off to get it out of the way. Looks like there's one on the bottom there. I'll start on the bottom and see what happens. There we go. Get that baffle plate out. We just take those two bolts out there, and probably that one at the bottom, and we'll pull that housing or whatever that is right off of there. So we did all that just so that we could access the carburetor. I don't want to have to get a carb kit for that. I think that's certainly overkill. Lots of can of worms I don't really want to open up. It's hard to get parts for some of these older guys, generators and stuff. And I mean, if a guy has to, he has to, but I don't think we need to take it that far. There's a bolt head on the bottom here. We're going to take that critter off and carefully pop this bowl off the bottom of the carburetor, and there'll be a seal up in here. We're going to try not to mess that up, because with any luck we'll just be able to bolt that back on and it'll seal up, and we won't need to order any parts. So when you loosen that off, all the gas that's in that carburetor bowl there is going to drain out the bottom, so it's a good idea to have something ready to catch it. We'll let her drain out and then we'll pull it off. This is what the drain plug looks like. And when you pull it off, then the bowl will just, basically, it should just pop straight down. The drain plug just holds it up against a seal by pressure. So if you can, try and orient the drain, keep in mind where the this outside bowl here, the orientation, put it back the same way it came off. So if there's any imperfections, you try and line them up with the seal so that it'll seal up better when you put it back together. That's just how much dirt was in it when it came off. It's not very bad. So what we've got inside here, that fills up with gas, and then this is the float. This moves up and down, it just floats. It runs on, there's a tiny little pin in here. I'll see if I can get it. You can see the pin. That pin should just pull out, and then above the corner of my screwdriver there, don't lose that. That's the needle that goes in the needle valve seat. It's just a little shiny little pin that the float pushes on up and down, and when it pushes up, it stops the gas supply, and then when the float drops down, it opens up just a little bit so that gas will fill that bowl. And when the bowl gets full enough, the pressure from the float pushing on it will seal that off and stop gas from running into the carburetor. So what I'm thinking is there's probably a little piece of dirt or something in there. So we're going to pull this pin out. We want to be very careful not to bend anything. It should just slide out really easy. And when we do, that needle valve is going to probably drop out of there. So we want to be careful we don't lose it. And so we'll just do that and clean it up a little bit. And I'll catch up with you in another minute here, see what we got. Alright, so here's what it looks like when it comes apart. This pin here just slides out of this part on the float. This is the float. And this is the needle valve. You can see the pointy end of the needle valve is the part that goes up and seats inside. There's a brass fitting inside there that has a corresponding surface that just has to fit against perfectly tight to stop the gas from running through there. So if there's any damage at all to that or in the brass fitting, then the person's going to need to get a carb kit for it. But hopefully it's just a little bit of dirt. One thing I did notice is if you look at this pin, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but this thing should be perfectly flat and straight, and you can kind of see it's a little bit shiny in places, and that's because this is a really old generator, and it has ran so long that just the vibrations have actually worn a little bit into that shiny little pin here, which tells me that there's a fair bit of wear on some of this stuff just from general vibration over the years. So I'm hoping it'll still go back together and function just fine, because it started all of a sudden. It wasn't a slow progressive thing, it just started doing it. So that makes me think that it's probably some dirt. Anyways, that little needle valve fits up into that brass fitting right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some fresh gas in here and just crack that drain cock just enough to flush out any little bit of dirt that's in there. Shut it off really quick. It's just going to run a little bit of gas through to clean everything out, and then I'll reassemble everything. It's kind of a little tricky to put everything together and get that needle valve back in there, but it's not too bad. So I'll go get some gas and flush it out. Guess I should have clarified what I needed the gas for. The fuel tank was just about empty, so when I needed to get some gas, I needed to put some in the tank to put enough in here so that we could open the drain cock and have some gas run out. So we'll just give it a little bump here. And that's probably more than enough. And reassemble everything. So there, we're back together. You see how everything works there. I had to hold that needle valve in place with a screwdriver with one hand while I put everything back on there with the other one so it didn't fall out. It might have been possible just to drain the carburetor, or drain the bowl in the carburetor and just flush it through that way without having to disassemble it. I don't know. I guess it would depend on how big a blockage you've got in there, whether it's just a little piece of rust or whether it's a piece of straw that's actually jamming up the hole. I don't know. Anyway, I've got it this far. I'll finish it up and see what happens. Well, I guess this will be the moment of truth. We won't know for sure until it's sat for a while if it's going to leak a little bit overnight, but we'll turn the valve on and see. It's gushing out of there. We know we got to go to plan B. May as well turn it on. So it should take a few minutes. Well, not that long. Gas has to come down through here, trickle in, and fill the bowl up. So it'll take about a minute or something like that, maybe not quite, to fill that up, and then we'll see if anything's dripping out. If not, I'll put the rest of the stuff on and we'll start her up and see what happens. So putting it back together so far, it's just the opposite of taking it apart. Just got to put this one more cover on and then that'll be back together. I probably don't need to prime it to start it, but there's just this neat thing I was going to show you. I'm going to prime it. So take the spark plug off. And so one of the problems with priming is having a suitable container and getting the right amount of fuel in there without dumping gas all over the place. So what I found pretty handy, I got a couple different sizes here. This is just piece of old brake line that's kind of bent into a question mark shape. It's been cleaned out, and there's a bigger one there, and I don't know if it's necessary. It's probably not a bad idea to ground yourself out before you stick this into a fuel tank or something, but anyways, you take the steel, and it can either be from the fuel tank or a jerry can or whatever. You just dip one end into the fuel, put your thumb over the other end, and then you've got a little tip there that you can take your thumb off and just, a little sloppy here because I got one hand. As soon as you take your thumb off, it just dribbles a little bit in there. And they kind of live on the jerry can there, and that's just so handy. You don't need to have another container. You can take it out of anything you can stick that in. Fit in there. One pip or 2 pips or however many you think you need. So it's a little snug. Pop this back on. Make sure that our gas is on. Power's off. Get a little bit of choke. We'll see what happens. It's been sitting outside all afternoon and no drippies, so I think she's fixed.